Welcome to the Ericzone podcast. Today, I'm so happy to have Jesse Greener, who's part of Independent Jewish Voices. Maybe you could introduce yourself.
Sure, no problem. I'm a professor at the Université Laval. I'm in the chemistry department. I'm also a member of Independent Jewish Voices and Jewish Faculty Network. So Independent Jewish Voices, I think maybe people, if they want to find the website, it's simple. It's ijvcanada.ca. Jewish Faculty Network is also interesting to check out some of the work they're doing, jewishfaculty.ca. Yeah, so I've been involved with both organizations. I would say more with Independent Jewish Voices, more sort of day-to-day, I guess you could say, or week-to-week. And we're a group that's bringing, new opportunity for Jews to organize around principles that they will not see in the mainstream sort of Jewish community. Principally, we've taken a vote to be an anti-Zionist organization. I think the inclination was always there, but this is our new sort of reality now, and we're also growing rapidly. And so it's really exciting to have a chance to talk to people about what the organization's doing and, give you an expose of one of the people who's involved.
And before we start, I just want to do a crucial neutrality disclaimer. I'm not here to be political. I'm just here to learn and exchange ideas. And so I thought I'd just put that in there. I was doing the research and I saw the conference in Hamilton with the panelists.
I have the book here that they were talking about.
What's the name of the book?
It's called Raising Palestine. Actually, funny, I didn't realize this until I picked it up in our house, but my partner wrote a chapter in here.
Really?
Yeah. And I hadn't read it before, so I flipped through it this morning. And it actually goes through a little bit of our history in the city and our challenges with certain aspects of the Jewish community specifically.
Okay. So when you mention your city, you mentioned like you're talking about Toronto or Hamilton or? Well,
it kind of has her chapter was the whole book is actually about punishing dissent. And when it comes to trying to, name the problems that are happening in the Middle East, specifically related to Israel. And her chapter talked about our family. I didn't sign a waiver, actually, but I'm okay with it. And it talks about some of the stories I actually wanted to mention today, in fact. I guess I could talk about that.
Sure, go ahead.
Sure. So my family, I won't go into the deep history with regard to this story, but of our family, but we were Toronto Jews, and my grandparents in North York, and my uncles and extended family members would, have Passover and other kinds of Jewish holidays together. We'd go to synagogue together. Infrequently. And when we came to Quebec City and had our two children, we didn't really have the ease of sort of communicating with that part of our culture. I'm the Jew in the family, actually. So, but we would, as a family, participate in that stuff. So we got involved with a synagogue. There's not a very large Jewish community in Quebec City, historically more than now. But there's really There's two synagogues. One, I would say, is a local synagogue. Another is kind of like almost like a franchise synagogue. So I don't really count that. And that synagogue we were going to, frequently for holidays and whatnot, various other events, bat mitzvahs, bar mitzvahs, whatever. And then with the war, eventually a genocide started happening in Gaza and Israel. We're quite opposed to that. And somehow this got roped into the synagogue, and eventually we were basically disinvited and barred from going to the synagogue. And so we kind of, the book actually mentions a little bit about that. We had, of course, we didn't take that sitting down, so we took the synagogue to the Human Rights Tribunal, and that's ongoing right now. It talks about that. It talks about other aspects of, we helped to rescue a family from Gaza. There's a story where this was just 2023, during the summer. There was a professor visiting from Gaza, and he basically became trapped after October 7th. Borders were closed. He couldn't go home. His family's stuck there. He's got a wife, 5 kids, other relatives, of course. His mother was living with them. And they were all stuck there, of course, like so many Palestinians, Gazans are still. And so I was speaking at a rally, and someone from the university who was kind of his guide, I guess, or his link to the university. He didn't speak French. He was obviously estranged from his family in a new place. He had to sort of makeshift, live for some indefinite point of time. Thankfully, that's become permanent. And there was just a really arduous process to work with the university, work with him. I mean, I got introduced and we became friends, and then we just kept in touch because his goal was to get his family here. Canada had started a program where they wanted to bring 2,000. They purported to want to bring 2,000 people, and then maybe more after that, to refugees into Canada. That was didn't happen the way it was planned. Actually, I don't think anybody really came through that program at all, and it was pulling teeth, as we say, to get even his family here. And so, the chapter talks about that as well. I found out this morning, so it's a nice little book. And as you mentioned, there was a lot of excitement around the publishing of this book when they launched it in Hamilton.
As I started with the Hamilton book launch on the Independent Jewish Voices YouTube channel, if people want to go have a look, and there's all these different videos that people can go watch, conferences, video conferences, but actual live, like the one in Hamilton was the one where I discovered David Miviser, and he was very like, don't take any bull, face what's going on, but you have support if you need it. And then he was inviting people to like stand up, and his message was clear. And that was like 5 months ago, apparently, according to YouTube. So I don't have the date exactly specifically there, but so to what extent did you have backup in this mobilization to help these families, to attempt to bring these families over? How did the Independent Jewish Voices get involved? Or
in fact, I would say that was more of a personal campaign. IJV, Independent Jewish Voices, wasn't, I mean, I will talk about them, of course. It's a very important organization to me and to so many Jews, and to actually, so many people who want justice in the Middle East. But no, they weren't involved. We did talk about at one point potentially doing a podcast with this person, but he was being thrown into so many things. We decided to back off. But no, there was really no pushback against trying to help this guy. And in fact, I'm usually quite critical of, let's say, institutions and universities can potentially, go down the wrong path, either by accident or on purpose. But in this case, the university was quite supportive. They had a legal team dedicated to his situation. I mean, what are you going to do? You've even put yourself in the spot of a university administrator. You've got a visiting professor here. He obviously requires some sort of dignity and respect for his position, at the very least, if not as a human being. And it's an awful situation. So you don't want to be seen to be like casting him aside or pushing him or anything like that. So that's the one thing. But honestly, I really did get a sense that there was a humanitarian, an openness, and a humanitarian aspect to all this. And I know that I worked with the legal team quite closely as well, and they were extremely motivated. I would say that, they were the ones pushing and volunteering their time. Like I mentioned, I met this person, the professor. I'm not naming him. Maybe I should or I shouldn't. But anyway, I met this guy.
Let me know if you want me to cut it out in the post production.
Yeah. Well, he's Professor Hellis, and I met him, like I mentioned, at a rally. But it was actually the person sort of bringing him around and showing him, the city and getting him integrated with the community that would be, the most accommodating, was one of the lawyers employed by the university. So they really pushed it, and I have to give them kudos for that. The university, on the other hand, was a little bit, they were very proud that this eventually worked out, and he was here and his family got here. at some point though, they were very just trying to follow the rules and trying to be like very neutral about it, not pushing. And so at some point, it was clear to me. I mean, I would meet him weekly for coffee to see how things are going and keep tabs. And he, at one point was, I cried.
No doubt. For sure, it must be so emotionally taking to see what's going on and to have like directly in touch with someone who's actually living this horror. And I think that human compassion is supremely important in these moments.
Yeah, totally. And just, it was clear to me that he was, he is a very gregarious, and he's a survivor for sure. He made his, he really, with his family here, he set everything up. He made contacts. He got support. But at some point you just see the powerlessness that he was under. And that's what really hit me, actually, because for someone who's, so vibrant and capable and just, on top of things, just kind of grasping for, desperately, I would almost say, for little, things that could help. And so he was at one point showing me all the names of the people that he was gathering together that could, important people that are, that as he would say, these are important people. They're going to help. They're going to do it, they've all promised to do what they can. And at one point he just recounted these names, holding on to them like they're kind of gold, to him. And he then told me that, and the university's got me a meeting with the mayor. And I was like, why are they,
it's a photo op. Sorry, no, I don't want to throw that in there, but
that's sort of what I'm
any
thinking,
visibility
right?
is good, but sometimes it's a photo op for the.
It's a photo op. It's also sort of a grasping, in my opinion. Like, what's the mayor going to do, right? Like, there's already been direct communication with the federal ministers involved, and the local MP. Our local MP is a minister himself. Jean-Yves Duclos, and so there was just. And at that point, I said, no, we have to go around the sort of acceptable approach, the mainstream approach, and so there was a company that's dubious in Egypt that it was started off as a tourism company, and they were organizing evacuations, and they were working with the Egyptian government, and they had contacts in Israel, and so. If you pay them a small fee, they can help get your people out. And so we paid not a small fee, but we got his. They do it by the person. Children are this much, adults are this much.
I think I've read about that. Was that Gideon Levy who mentioned it in his book, or I've read about it? Yeah.
Yeah, it was the only really mechanism that was going to be kind of reliable for a certain period of time. I forget the name of the company. If you look it up, you'll definitely find that.
I'll find it.
Hala was the
Hala Consulting and Tourism, a private Egyptian firm linked to state security ties, and also they offer, for the right price, we offer you transport from Palestine to somewhere else
for the low
or
price.
Back. I think that's what I read. They can bring you back as well.
So Hala company would take people largely in one direction out of Gaza. They charged $5,000 for an adult and $2,500 for a child. This was US dollars. And I do believe that they would also take people back in some cases. I believe there was cases where...
Pre-2023, probably more than...
Well, pre-2023, yes, all these back and forths. Post-2023, October... they were evacuating, and I think in some cases there was certainly back and forth back to Gaza in the case that some kind of special circumstances required someone to leave and come back. But largely Israel didn't want anybody to come back. Of course, they want to depopulate the area. So we wired some money to his sister. We met with her to on a Zoom call, and. Also heartbreaking. We were prepared to just, put up the money and try to recover it later on. And we really had a good community support. We were largely recovered what we put into that. But there was his mother, his brother, and wife and 5 kids. And so the plan was to wire the money to his sister. We met with her. his sisters, of course, that's her mother too, and that's her, brother. The two brothers are, involved. One's still in Gaza. He's still got many other relatives there. And, she was talking about the kids that she has that are stuck in Gaza. And of course, we couldn't afford to, bring everybody out, but, it's just heartbreaking to hear like how much more.
Yeah, you got to choose who's going to be safe and saved or taken away from harm.
Yeah, so that's
over $20,000 just for like the 2 adults and 5 kids, you said?
So 3 adults, 15.
3, yeah, that's 15.
5 kids. And so we're sending that money, and, we're just hoping like that she can she needed cash. So it's like literally taking like that, huge amount of money, waiting in line in this company where people are going to know that they're all doing the same things. People sitting there with huge amounts of money trying to get their loved ones out of Gaza. So anyway, it worked out. There was many hiccups along the way. I was in the bank. I brought him to the bank to make sure that, if in case I needed anything from him, that went smoothly. The teller miswrote something, and I'm waiting. And we know that the border's going to, and they went through Rafah, the Rafah border, and we know that the borders are very tenuously open. And so the timing barely worked out, because by the time we found out that there was an error, a clerical error, I had to go back, and then there's always a delay to get the money to actually flow once everything's properly figured out.
Must be so unbelievably complicated to the logistics of this kind of undertaking of saving lives and bringing them out of a war situation. And do I say war? Do we say war? Is it a war?
It's a war situation. I think you can say. I think it's fair to say, but it's. I mean, if we're going to classify it, it's a very one-sided. It's it's a genocide right now, and has been.
It's the words being used. Often I'm going to cringe at what I'm reading, considering like the media, mainstream legacy media, how they're employing this vernacular that just like helps a certain narrative. And war is one of the words that I see go by that is like...
Yeah, conflict, war, people are dying, people are killed usually Israelis are killed and the Palestinians are dying. Like, there's all sorts of loaded terms. Well, I will say that it is a bit of a minefield, like metaphorically, to talk your way through these issues. Yeah,
exactly. Walking on eggshells.
But I think, like you said, from what you heard other people saying, like we have to, at some level, we have to like lead with our hearts, and if our tongue is a bit tied, there's the intention is the most important thing. But there's also a chance to learn about how to, what is the difference of a war and a genocide, and what is anti-Semitism exactly, and who's saying, it depends often on who's making the definition up, or who's using the definition, I should say.
Yeah, because you mentioned rules. That's the whole thing right now, is like the rules that are being put in front of us. These are rules that are put by the legal systems, by the governments, and we have to maneuver and we have to update these rules that are totally not adjusted to the human plight. There's definitely kids dying right now. There's definitely families being murdered. And also, there's the appropriation of the Jewish culture and Jewish religion, which is absolutely unbelievable. So all this is, I watch this every morning, every evening. I'm like, how can this end?
Yeah.
So I'm glad you're here.
I know, I'm really glad to be here. And I think I feel the darkest moments and when I'm looking at all this isn't that we're powerless. It's that we kind of just give in. We just it's just easier to, we humans are adaptable. We adapt to all sorts of situations. I guess it's a strength, but at the same time, you don't want to adapt to injustice. And that's my concern, is that as things drag on, and reality, quote unquote, reality establishes itself as a new paradigm, and it's just worse, far worse than before. But people still got rent to pay, and they still got, bills and whatnot, that they just accept that. And so I'm really glad that that's not been the case largely. I think people are, in fact, becoming more interested in the subject, interest being, I'm using the English term of interest there, not to...
No, but interested in the well-being of others. And
Yeah. And more than that, willing to do something about it. And so this discussion is key. Discussion precedes everything before action. And in fact, this is kind of an action in a sense as well, because
I have a friend, she told me, like, because I've been sharing videos, sharing posts, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, whatnot, and social media is starting to be controlled by a corporate interest. She says, go out there, go on the streets and protest. That's going to work. But I'm like, I'm too old to get hit by cops and get my ass kicked. Sorry, pardon my French, but like, what can I do? So at this point, this is like, finally I get to talk about this on the podcast, and anybody out there that wants to help and talk and communicate, it's absolutely important. Go out there, whatever you can do, voice your concerns, communicate, reach out, share information.
The fact is that information has been one of the fronts, if we can call this like in military terms, has been one of the battlefronts in being able to just talk about Israel. And that was well before 2023. I mean, this shirt I'm wearing here is a campaign from Independent Jewish Voices, and is one of the founding campaigns. I mean, apartheid and Israel and the appropriation of Palestinian land, this goes back a long time, and we can talk about that. But in terms of what we can do, I mean, it is really important to reestablish some facts, because I think even Netanyahu himself, who is initially quite proud of the fact that they're fighting battles on 7 different fronts. And one of them, if I'm not wrong, he was actually talking about the sort of, in blunt terms, the propaganda war. And that's largely happening online. And so they would use different terms, but that's pretty much what we're talking about. So it is important. So what can we learn about, I mean, what do you want to talk about in terms of some of the in words or the issues that seem like kind of off topic, or as we say, third rail topics that we can get into today? Is there anything in particular?
But we can always refer to the list. I mean, people probably don't know this, but podcasting is just not like not just a improv thing where people start talking. I mean, there's I'm glad we got to talk over the phone, and we've been sending emails and looking at links at what we could talk about. And obviously, if you want, we can just refer to the many topics that we found. But
okay,
we do what you want. You're my guest, man.
That's cool. Well, let's first of all, I think we
got our books.
We got our books. We're all ready to go here. So I think a book that could be a great starting point for people, it was really, I found it quite interesting, so I'll dig it out from my pile of books here, is Molly Crabapple's. Yeah, they're cool. Although I don't read enough these days, but here's Molly Crabapple's book.
There's so much stuff going on, but yeah, I need to get that book.
This is a great book. So this book is about the Jewish Bund. And what is the Jewish Bund? It was really how Jews, one of the political and social, cultural organizations that Jews established for themselves in sort of Poland and the early 1900s in Russia, when Russia was in control of those areas. And first of all, the good thing about reading a book like this, or going into the deeper history that's going back into the 1700s even, is just to demystify the, what's up with Jews, basically, right? Because if you listen to any, real Zionist perspective, where we're just interested in protecting Israel at all costs, and it's our main goal, and this is the sort of
the fortress mentality.
It becomes a fortress mentality, but if you exactly so, and if you want to sort of get an idea, that there's a story behind all this, of course. Like, where did this all come from? And so just to look back at the history, and this book does a nice job. There's many books that do great jobs about this as well. But this is specifically focusing on the Bund. And so this is kind of, it's not just talking about all of the times that Jews were assailed and thrown out and killed, and, pogroms and all of this. It's actually showing the agency that Jews had as a people.
As contributors in the diaspora, as like, sorry, I'm putting contributed to a society which they've met, or they're included in.
That's exactly it. So that one of the main tenets of Bundism was that, and it became more and more established as it's kind of in contrast to as Zionism became a thing as well, which did not exist very, seriously in the distant past, which is another interesting reason to look at the past. But one of the tenets is that, and it's actually the name of the book, "Here Where We Live Is Our Country," and that was actually one of their mantras. It was basically to say, we're not going to get moved involuntarily. We live here. We're part of the, as you said, we contribute to the dynamic society. It's a little bit like the term Samud that is sort of representing, I guess, the Palestinian struggles, especially these days, which is resistance through existence. And it's sort of I would say quite close also to indigeneity in North America, where the people and the land are inseparable. And they're, it's a mutual relationship, and there's a sort of anchoring of a people to a land. But I wanted to talk a little bit about just the situation the Jews were in. So in
Ukraine, Russia, and Poland.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because and I'm wondering if it's a reaction to nationalism, because I think that in the around the industrial era, the beginning, that's when nationalism started to occur, and probably the Bund was kind of like a reaction to that. I guess I'd have to look into that.
That's great. That's a great way to put it. I would agree. I'm not a historian, but this is how I feel about it as well. The Bund, the Jews themselves, always being kind of cast on the outside of a society, always being kicked around. I mean, people think Europe has it does have a long history, of course, but it was not a stable place, and still not a very stable place, probably. And borders were changing. Despots were in charge in different places.
Russia was still in feudalism and
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, there's feudalism was all over Europe.
Yeah, but I mean, in the 1890s or something,
the czars were in charge.
That's crazy.
Yeah. No, it's crazy. It's crazy to think about that. But there's still monarchy in the UK. I mean, it's not really
representative,
serious,
but it's still.
But it's a hangover for sure. But the Europe is full of that stuff, right? And the borders, the Jews were, from my readings, there was a content period in the late 1700s, even, when Poland would actually, if they invited Jews to come, they wanted them to be part of the Commonwealth. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was it had a quite important land sort of area. It incorporated places that you mentioned already, like the Ukraine, Belarus, obviously Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, parts of Russia, and some other parts of other countries that that are countries today. When that got folded in, basically the Prussians from the west, the Austrians from the south, and the Russians from the east basically just collaborated to take over that area. And the Russians took control of the east, the most eastern parts of this Commonwealth where the Jews were mostly located. And it went from a stable situation for the Jewish people there to tumultuous and dangerous. And it was Catherine the Great. And so she established what was called the Pale of Settlements. And that was just before the 1800s, the 1790s, early 1790s. And that developed into something formalized in the early 1810s. And this is called the Pale of Settlements. And this was basically where they would hive off the western part of Russia. So, the Tsars, the royal family of the Russian Empire, basically took control of these Jews, and they didn't really know what to do or at all want them in the empire. But they didn't want to lose the territory. They didn't want to create an official Holocaust, I guess. So they actually just cordoned it off. And so these are kind of it ghettoized a whole region, whole area, and this is called the Pale. And what's quite interesting is that the Jews were largely the reason for that. There was Polish people there as well, and other sort of ethnicities that were sort of caught up in this settlement area. And it was poor. The Jews were especially denigrated there. They were the the lowest of the low, I guess you could say, in the Pale. They would not be able to own land and farm. They would not be able to go to universities, except for some, religious schools, I guess, were available. And they couldn't own businesses, if I am not wrong. But anyway, there was quite a problem situation for them. And they basically, forced Jews into jobs like inner city work, factory work, working for kind of menial tasks in the cities, clerical work. There was this pushed them into kind of money lending and these kinds of things, all in the cities. And in these very dense and dynamic cities, you would actually find a lot of politics that are, you'll see in today's cities, like poverty, lack of access to resources and services and this sort of thing. And so the Jews and the socialists, Polish socialists, for example, really co-developed their own, politic. They weren't always working together, but there was a good collaboration amongst people on a class level. And there was a good inner collaboration, I guess, of the Jewish people to do, provision of services, like community organizing, I guess you would call it these days, and stuff like that. So you can see that there's a sort of a progressive element right away.
But it's always been in the Jewish culture, unless I'm mistaken. Like from an outside view, from my perspective, it seems like, and Norman Finkelstein mentioned it recently. I saw an interview and he mentions that the Jewish ability for community is very strong and very tightly knit. So, and especially so, I guess, when there's repression.
Yeah, that's just it. I think, it's hard to say. I think people sort of look down on Jews for being insular and operating outside of society, and, in a kind of a negative way. But I think the way you put it, it's quite important. It's also a reaction to the environment. And when you are, as a people, isolated and targeted, you're going to look to yourself first and foremost for strength and support. And so that's, but there was a collaboration as well. And so the politic that developed out of that time was really socialist. It was very socialist. And progressive, and to what ends there was a possibility to get integrated with, let's say, normal quote unquote society, kind of liberal as well, and interested in building institutions and that kind of stuff. But
so the Bund was created in this situation, in this atmosphere of Catherine the Great's
her Pale of Settlements.
Pale of Settlements.
That was largely the impetus for. I mean, this is what brought everybody together. But I think what the Bund was a reaction to that. It was also a reaction, though, to the everyday kind of problems that come with being kind of isolated in this kind of an environment. And so, for example, just labor issues, there wasn't a lot of labor law back then, as you can imagine, right? So they had to fight for their rights, and the idea of a syndicate or a union, not very well developed either, especially in these areas where systematically the idea of disenfranchising people is also brought to the workplace as much as possible as well. And so just to be able to represent yourselves and say, we 50 people who are working in this seamstress kind of factory want to, make ventilation because it's hot in here, or, come to as a collective kind of a process, that doesn't always sit well with the bosses. And so that was even a militant step by itself. So yeah, it wasn't just, Catherine the Great and her Pale and then the czars that followed her. It was just the everyday life of what it's like to live in a urban, poor environment.
With the tsars and the royalty.
Well, I don't know.
Grabbing your wealth, deciding for you where to go, what to do.
And often punctuated by attacks on your communities and sort of thing. I mean, and you hear stories of workers who are in the, miners who are holding a strike and they get beat up by thugs or cops or, both. I mean, those things would happen all the time. All the time. And God forbid if a Jew had a store or something, and they're actually, now becoming a little bit more in control of their own destiny. Yeah, that would be even more, I guess, an affront to the certain powers and anti-Semites, I guess.
So the Bund was created, and from that, I mean, I don't perhaps try to link it to today, which has been perspective of those ideas of the Bund and Avi Lewis, who was in the NDP. I'd have to look at this info. I'm going into uncharted territory.
I didn't send you any slides about that. Well, okay. So the Bunden today, I mean, let's just say that I think there is a resurgence in the interest in the Bund right now, and it's mostly about people finding this sort of secret history that they can highly relate to, that's never really been promoted or could even be said to be of sort of exercised from the historical record. And so people are quite curious about that. But also the thing that really I think is exciting people about this sort of secret history of Jews is that it's with respect to its position to Zionism. And this idea that being Jewish doesn't necessarily mean being a Zionist. This was perfectly encapsulated in the Bund movement. And so when people like, Avi Lewis these days are not just kicking around, but they're leading a party now. Like he ran the leadership of the NDP, along with other important Jewish activists as well. There was not just the election of the leader, which Avi won, but he had around him a campaign team. And so you got Stephen Lewis. We didn't talk about him, his father, but that's fine. But there was the president of the party. There's like the treasurers of the party. And the old establishment, which was quite resistant within the NDP, I should say, which was quite resistant to kind of getting into this discussion, ended up, getting positions filled by Jewish activists that are, I would say, expressly anti-Zionist.
Okay, so former NDP deputy leader Libby Davies, who was elected as vice president, and also, so obviously Lewis as leader, Ricardo as president, and Leah Gazan among its high-profile MPs.
Ricardo and Leah Gazan, yeah. So this was like a shock to to see that the progressive Jews could basically not only break down this sort of mentality where the NDP should stay clear of like controversial topics, but to storm in there with progressive anti-Zionist Jews for the most part. I don't want to put their politics in their mouths, but very much in line with the Bund politics. This excited a lot of people, and it wasn't just like a random thing that got people excited. It was actually because of the institutions that are growing around that again, progressive Jews are building for themselves once again. So in Canada, Independent Jewish Voices being a prominent one, and there's lots of other great organizations, the Jewish Faculty Network and predecessors to IJV and other and even non-Jewish organizations. This is really a movement, and it's bearing fruit now, I guess you could say.
Because it's community, it's Jewish community, but also it's like human community. It's super important to connect and to exchange ideas and to join forces and like to have like justice in regards to the human plight and the problems of our world, and exchanging ideas and trying to make things better. Progressive socialism, which currently is viewed in a bad eye by certain legacy media in the States and American presidents. We got Bernie Sanders, who's really pushing towards like socialism. He's promoting it. So the word, we could do like just a little interlude about socialism, but why is it viewed badly, and why is it so like...
Yeah, my feeling about that, it's hard to say, of course. It's these things
like the Second World War, it was appropriated. Socialism was appropriated by a certain party that really destroyed its core idea of like human values and connect.
Do you mean the Nazis?
Yeah.
The Nazis, yeah, sure. Well, first of all, the history of socialism obviously goes back way before World War II. And actually, like I said, even when the Bund was starting in the late 1800s and its sort of strength into the early 20s, and which really, just to digress on the history of that, it was the Bund that really helped. It was at one point the most populated or largest socialist party in the Russian Democratic Socialist Party, or whatever they were called back then. And they had a huge influence on things, including, leading up to the revolution that kicked out the Tsars, or I think they took off actually because things weren't going well for them. But Yeah, the Bund was important, and we can just say in general, socialist Jews were important in that work, and they were international in scope because what country? It's kind of a beautiful thing in a way. They don't. I don't really feel connected to any. I live in Canada. I lived in Toronto. I live in Quebec. I don't feel nationalist in any way, and that's a lot of people feel that way. A lot of people. I don't know. I mean, it's just kind of like another false idol that you're kind of like. There's reasons to have a pride in your country, I think, and for Quebecers, for example, to be like, we have to protect our way in this otherwise wash of English. It totally makes sense. But you look at the Jews back in Poland and early and later in Russia and later all over the place. The diaspora is actually a quite important source of thought and culture of itself. And in fact, there was no country for Jews back in those days, so they were naturally internationalists, right? They just wanted to make sure where they lived, they were safe, and they had community, and they had a good life, like kind of what everybody wants.
So compared to the fortress mentality, it's the tent mentality, or putting up the tent and joining a community and helping the community. Yeah,
exactly. And so actually it's so when the Zionists came around, and there's a very sordid history how Zionists conspired with some of the worst elements of anti-Semitic elements. And frankly, you could say that in participation in with those anti-Semitic elements, you kind of propagate anti-Semitism yourself as a Zionist. And we could talk about, the
dichotomy.
Well, not just the dichotomy, but the relationships that led to Israel that involved both Jews and some like these Polish military creeps. So the history of early Zionists working with the very same people that were pushing out Jews is a sordid story. As I said, it's something people should look into for sure to just get more context about the establishment of Israel. But Jabotinsky Vladimir Jabotinsky, or Zev Jabotinsky, depending on if you're using his Hebrew name or his Russian name, he basically worked directly with the military kind of anti-Semitic leaders in Poland who were really aggressively trying to push Jews out of the territory. And so on the one side, you got to push from the Poles. On the other side, you got to pull from the Zionists. And the Poles would they gave weapons to the early Zionists so that they could help colonize Palestine and give them training, and made sure that they didn't come back to protect the Jews in Poland. And in fact, they lauded Jabotinsky. He was in newspapers called the hero to the Poles. The Independent was basically, that's an acronym, I think, for the nationalist movement, or national democracy, I think it was called, in Poland, which is a strictly nationalistic and anti-Semitic party. And they were pushing out the Jews, and Jabotinsky and the early Zionists were working with these folks. I mentioned that Jabotinsky was lauded by the Poles as a hero to the Poles. He was named the Jewish Andechka, and his goal was basically thanked for, and I have a quote even, removing millions of destructive microbes from Poland. Okay, and so he's working with these people. They're providing him weapons to go back to Palestine to help clear the area and do terrorism. And of course, there was fighting on both sides in early Israel and Palestine when the settlers came in. But if you look at the maps or the trends of the population growth in Palestine.
Yeah, Palestine in like the late 19th century until like the first colonizers who were moved by... Ben Gurion, that would be right after Jabotinsky, or did they actually...
I think so, for sure. But what I'm trying to say is that the British mandate, which was the British were in control of the Ottoman Empire, which basically of Palestine, and they they had some interests in, geopoliticking and having
the region. They wanted a foothold in the region for sure.
Yeah, and so they had the foothold, but militarily, but they wanted a population that's going to work more closely. I'm presuming here. It sort of turned out that way after Israel was officially created in 48. I think by 56 there was already a war with Egypt to get control of the Suez Canal. So I don't know, how far back or how much plans were made on these sort of geopolitical sides, but I do know that these early Zionists were really motivated to get Palestinians out of the way and to get Jews out of Poland. And if you look at the growth, what I was getting at is the growth of population in that area. There's kind of two jumps. In the 1920s, there had always been some Jews in Palestine. Everybody knows that. But
Christians, Muslims.
Yeah, Christians, Muslims, Jews, they're all mixed, and everything was fine before it became, the goal to make that an ethno-state was on the table. But the big times when you saw population increases were early 1920s and sort of early to mid 1930s.
Here you go. For those who want to see the graph, well, go on YouTube.
Yeah, so just I actually cut and paste a bunch of images out of a report on Al Jazeera, and it just goes through the history of population changes and borders and whatnot inside of Palestine and developing into sort of Israel-controlled Palestine and whatnot. So, and the point I wanted to make was the growth in population, which is also shown in on the right of your screen there. And you can see that we didn't start at zero. There was always some Jews there. Then a steady growth until the 20s, and then a rapid growth in the early, around 1925. It's kind of interesting to look at the periods, what was going on during those times, and and
during fascism and communism in Europe in 1933, 30,000.
Yeah, big jumps. So this is Hitler took over in the early 30s, and this is among the most aggressive times that Jews faced in Poland, because the Poles were. I don't know what they were thinking, but they were kind of behaving like little Nazis, basically. And they were, and the Bund was like always antagonizing them. There's some great, I'll probably dig up a quote at some point, but the point is though that during those times, that's, when we saw some real growth in the movement into Israel. So I'm going to read from, if it's okay, from Molly's book here.
Absolutely.
I'm on page 226, and this is under the subchapter Palestine. She says, in the Zionist movement, the Polish government found a loyal ally in their plans for ethnic cleansing. During the same years that the Polish government supported fascist youth groups terrorizing Jewish neighborhoods, they provided machine guns, Mauser rifles, and military training to 3 Zionist militias in Palestine. I won't name them all. And these groups answered to David Ben-Gurion, as well. During the same years that the Polish government demanded the expulsion of 3 million Jewish citizens, Jabotinsky toured the country calling for their evacuation, in quotes, a fine distinction that the Bund didn't appreciate. So when they're getting pushed out on one case and they're being, evacuated by the Zionists on the other side. When Jabotinsky spoke in Vilna, the Bund was there to picket the man they called the spiritual father of Jewish fascism. Well, I think there's a lot about Jabotinsky here.
Fascinating.
So the Bund was very critical, not even skeptical. I mean, they saw what was going on here, that there was a collaboration.
That was 1970. When was that? Because I have a photo of Jabotinsky in 1917.
These quotes that I was just talking about, they come during that second bump there in the 1933s, just after Hitler was brought to power in Germany, and the heavy presence of Polish anti-Semites and nationalist fascists were pushing around people and trying to ethnically cleanse Poland. That was 33 to 38, according to these records. So you can see here that these big bumps were at the expense of Jews They were in collaboration. The historical record shows a strong collaboration between the early Zionists and those anti-fascists, the fascists. So, but this project and this graph we're looking at here is all pre-Israel, actually. This is the pre-Israel growth. But yeah, for sure, there's lots of collaborations with fascists all over Europe.
And it went on for a while, because now the graph stops at 1946, but I don't know if you further down the line you wanted to talk about perhaps the Iraqi Jewish community. There's Avi Shlaim. I read his book, amazing book. Maybe I should pop it out. I don't know have you read his book?
I have not.
Oh, I can show you. Avi Shlaim, Three Worlds. Great book. Tells the story of Iraqi Jewish culture, which went through the same process. They were quote unquote forced out of Iraq. I'm paraphrasing, but him and his family were in Iraq. They were comfortable. They were part of a community. There were some tensions because of the British control, but eventually they were pushed out. They needed to go in the pipeline, as you said, and they had to go to Israel, and they started at the bottom of the pile because they were quote unquote Arab, and they had to go through these. Yeah. So Avi Shlaim, a new historian. Today he's old, so he's not the new historian, but it's a fascinating story. Also, this Hungary, the Jewish communities in Hungary, The Great Escape, one of my favorite books.
Yeah, very cool. What year is this?
So this is Hungary in the 1930s.
Yeah.
The New York Cafe in Hungary was a place where all of these different Jewish minds would join and discuss mathematics, different sciences, and the effervescence. It's a fascinating era in Hungary. I strongly recommend that book.
Yeah. Well, it's about the same time. So my family escaped out of Poland in 1939. They were in a city called Zamość, and this is pretty close to modern day Ukraine. But it was sort of squarely in the Russian Empire at the time, and the Germans in that particular city, they did a quick a strafing. They flew a plane by and just shot bullets through the city, and they just killed 250 people right away as a sort of a scare tactic. Actually, one of my family members was killed in that very moment, and then they brought in the army. I guess it was some kind of a scout group or something, because they retreated kind of within a week after that. And then there was like this dance going on between the Russians and the Germans over this town, Zamość. And actually, in retrospect, you read that the city was actually targeted, and the region was targeted by the Germans as a foothold into Eastern Europe. So at the time, the Germans came in. They established a Judenrat, which is this kind of racist idea where the Jews will take care of themselves under the German authority, and then they left. And then the Russians came in, and they basically said, like, they're coming back. You can come and leave with us, or you can stay. But we're leaving in a day or something. And so there's a funny story where my family was, they weren't really convinced to leave. Only eventually 7,000 or 8,000 people left with the Russians at that moment. And it was disaster for everybody who stayed, of course. But the reason that the family left was that one of the members refused to take off his communist armband. And the family was like, if the Germans come in and you're wearing that, we're all done for, right? You have to take that off. And he refused. He said, we're leaving with the Russians, or we're all going to die here for sure. He was already convinced that was going to happen. I mean, there's already ample evidence from the years before that Jews were just cannon fodder anyway. So he had a good reason for this. So the family decided, well, we can't just leave you behind, and we're not going to sit here and, be labeled communists, or maybe some of them even were, I have no idea. But they had decided to leave. And they had a circuitous sort of travel through Europe, and it wasn't great, of course, but, ending up in Siberia and Kazakhstan and whatnot. But they survived. And so, there's a lot of migration, either self-migration in this case, or organized, but never to Israel, strangely enough. My family really had no connection to Israel except for just after the war, briefly. But yes, just to your point, yeah, the migration and the ethnic cleansing during those times were intense, and this, of course, then I come to like Israel now. Like this bunker mentality that you've mentioned a couple of times. Like, how could you can almost understand that where it's coming from, right?
Because it's post-traumatic syndrome on a societal level. And that's where compassion is important. And I'm surprised that there hasn't been some kind of reflection, and maybe there was a thought of considering that in regards to the post-traumatic of the Second War and the Holocaust. Like, at some point, was there any effort into reaching out to the global community and discussing what might happen in the years to come and the generations of like the post-traumatic effect of families being eradicated and the violence of the Second War and the horrors? Like, because today that's what's going on. Like, people are traumatized. Like, it's just me. I'm not Jewish. I'm affected by the idea of the Second War. My grandfather was there, was fighting Nazis, and almost died a couple of times. And I know about the Second War. I'm aware of it. I've watched tons of documentaries. I'm aware that, and it's a horror. It's like, it's such an impactful event in the human history that today we're still feeling the repercussions of the horror of it. And that's what's going on. Like, there needs to be compassion and the appropriation of the Jewish religion and the culture by the corporate interests, by the British Empire, is absolutely evil. It's evil what they did.
I would, I mean, the fact that the point you made right at the beginning of that, was anyone trying to reach out to, the Jews in Israel, let's say, or across the world, to try to, I guess what you're asking is like, do some kind of intervention where we can sort of recognize there's just trauma, recognize there's, people who are desperately affected by that. And I again, I'm not a historian, but if you look at what's going on today, I don't think anyone's trying to lay out the cards on the table and have a honest discussion about, okay, where's this all coming from? Why is there such a bunker mentality, leading to such a bunker mentality? I think people are doubling down on that. And it's because it's a very primitive approach of like, we're like, now that Zionism is kind of lost its shine, to say the least, during this genocide. And now even that non-Jews are clearly interested in Zionism, are clearly Zionists. Like Joe Biden himself said, I'm the I'm a biggest Zionist. Or
they asked him, "Are you Zionist?" Yes. But at that point, he was out. Biden had like cognitive issues. Like, he was.
I wouldn't blame it on the cognitive issues. I mean, he was
already a Zionist.
He was always a Zionist. I mean, he his famous quote that came back with a vengeance was that if Israel didn't exist as a country, the United States would have to invent it. I mean, luckily for them, the Brits already did that. No, it was a strategic ally, of course, in the Middle East, overseeing like the most oil-rich place on the planet, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of naval travel and other political intersections that obviously, empires like the British and the American, wanted to have a say in. So, but my point is that the idea that Zionism and the bunker mentality that has been, related to it now, is not something that psychologists are going in and trying to help with. It's entrenched, and people are. It's a very primitive kind of. Now that the brand of Israel is no longer something that everybody can get behind, and in fact is something that people are opposed to largely, increasingly. How do we fight back? And so instead of trying to, work out these issues, those very entrenched, anxious, defensive mentalities are kind of used as a weapon, or as a I don't want to say weapon, but as a way to push back. and it really people have been doubling down on the use of, going after quote unquote anti-Semites because they're simply trying to defend Palestinian rights. So no, I don't. I think, and this is where the West, I think, is really culpable because they're used. I feel honestly that Jews are being used, have been being used. They're on board fully now. The sort of a Stockholm syndrome, maybe you could say, where the victim is adopting the attributes of the perpetrator. But that's really been foisted on Jews. And we can see from the early history that there was this collaboration that really enhanced and promoted this kind of internal interest towards Zionism.
So when is it going to stop? Like just the pogroms and all the horrors that have been that have been committed on the Jewish people, but like anywhere and across the planet, there's always been genocides, like the First Nations. It's like, when is it's a biological thing in humans. I don't know how to explain it, but when is all that going to stop? But also the appropriation of Jewish culture right now in the religion to accommodate corporate interests, and it's horrible. Like they've taken over. It's absolutely insane. Like when is the repression and the horrors going to stop?
I don't know. I think there's power structures. Zionism fits squarely into the world power structures. National, international, economic, military. There's a whole lot of I don't like to say religious but religion's obviously floating in between all of these power structures and sort of lubricating it, I guess you could say. Yeah,
because they've appropriated Christian religion as well. Like the Christians in the U.S. are, I don't want to say like they're completely out of their minds, but they've taken over Christian religion to accommodate corporate interests.
Well, I would say that things are very dynamic, and so it's not it's not like everything's black and white, obviously, and I always try to avoid. This is where the depression or the impetus to give in comes from, because if it's just this ubiquitous, these forces that are beyond our control, beyond our, maybe even our comprehension, it's like all of the Christians in the States have been taken over. Or someone might say like all of the Jewish minds have been colonized with their own, desires for an Israel or something like this. I would say that's just a little too basic. And that's maybe where we can find some hope, because there are obviously lots of examples, counterexamples to everything that you just said. And I do think that while I'm personally not a religious person, I am quite motivated, or my spirits are buoyed, raised by the idea that the sort of religious communities who have largely been spoken for are actually finding their own voice. And so we come back to, Jews coming back to their roots, and finding out that actually my ancestors, my family members, even from not that long ago, were anti-imperialist. And this whole idea of an imperialist and colonial project in Israel is actually something that my own family probably railed against at the time. And that reconnection is powerful. And I think, but the problem is that there are so many structures in place that maintain the status quo, that to undo some of this stuff, it's not just like all of a sudden Christians wake up and realize that Christian Zionism is a crazy, cult that have been pushed on their parents or something, but that they can actually find a way that many people are finding that out, of course, and this is obviously great, and this is where the conversation is very helpful. But insofar as making action towards erasing that, one might say kind of passively, well, this is a youth versus, maybe more established aged people, and we'll move in and they'll move out, and who knows, maybe there's some hope with the new generation. That's a kind of a standard, fallback position that we can always hope for the future and hope for the youth.
Because the objective of the youth or Independent Jewish Voices, what this organization is attempting to do or currently doing is not invalidating the fears and the horrors of the people that have been through the Holocaust. It's to change the rules, as you mentioned earlier, is the rules that are in place are not adequate or not functional in regards to the deployment of these policies, which are not taking into consideration the value of humans, whatever religion, whatever cultural group or ethnic group. And so Independent Jewish Voices is attempting to update the presence of the diaspora, and I mean, it's fascinating what's being done.
So first of all, yeah, you're right. We can never invalidate or push down the facts of what Jews have been through and other groups, but we can. And there's nothing that you can really say, well, that's the past. We'll move forward. I mean, that history is there. It's even probably sort of buried in people's DNA, I guess. I'm not a biologist, but these. I have lots of. I can say it from looking around my family. There's mental health that may be related to these kinds of previous trauma, but so you can't just wash that away. But I think what is really interesting that Independent Jewish Voices or the American counterpart, Jewish Voices for Peace, and there's so many other groups like that around the world. What they offer is the ability to actively engage once again on terms that people identify with that have not been incorporated into the sort of mainstream, we could say Zionist approach in the past. And so you're seeing a lot of people, a lot of youth for sure, who are when I was at various ceremonies as a kid, and we have the Passover Seder, and there's parts of that, and you're like, I don't really identify with this. I mean, there's some, in one song that I love, we love singing, Dayenu. It has, let's just say, questionable lyrics. That we could say vengeful. There's like a history of you've been repressed and you feel anger, and it's not always directed in a positive way. And so that turns people off for sure, right? But IJV, for example, Independent Jewish Voices, I forgot my radical Haggadah, which is the text that goes along with the Seder. But Independent Jewish Voices also provides like a sort of a ritualistic or a cultural aspect that in parallel with the political work that's going on. And so to kind of reconnect with the religion and the culture, not all Jews are actually religious. And so you'll see in here sort of a retelling, many examples of re-envisaging certain traditions in a way that is more, I would say, up to date with the way people are thinking, and really providing that venue for people to look again at the culture and the religion in a different perspective. And this is really one thing that's empowering people. The other thing that's empowering people is to simply give the chance of expressing themselves politically as well. And so there's lots of political campaigns that IJV is doing, and this is and in Jewish Voices for Peace is really kind of an amazing. I would say it's slightly, when you look at the Canada versus the States, usually there's kind of like a 10-to-1 ratio. But where we have like thousands of members, let's say 2,000-3,000 members, they're well above that 10%. Bigger than we are in terms of the Jewish Voices for Peace paid memberships, let alone the hundreds of thousands of non-paid members that are working with Jewish Voices for Peace. And so it's really, it is really exciting to see that there's a new chance for Jews to kind of cast off what maybe their parents or grandparents are, their opinions, and take their own voice toward the future.
Yeah, because how many generations does it take for the post-traumatic stress to dissipate or to open the door to healing and yeah, because as you said, genetically it does have an impact. Like I'm not even I'm not currently religious or in any community, and I'm feeling the stress directly from my grandfather to the impact on my family, and today who I am is connected to my grandfather being shelled by Nazis and having to jump into a pit in a horse carcass and being shot at. Like this, the PTSD goes far into the families, into the future, and so. Can you? I have a question. You say you're not religious. So how does that work with Jewish religion being? How are you not religious?
I remember I've been asked this many times. Like, what is a Jew if they're not religious? Well, first of all, I would say the pogromists, the people launching pogroms, didn't care. They didn't care if you were in a synagogue or you were a radical socialist. The fact is, they actually looked at Jews more as a race and an ethnicity. They didn't care if you're practicing or not. That didn't get you, quote unquote, out of jail with these anti-Semites. So there's a history of, it's kind of like in Quebec, the national religion for the longest time was Catholic. It was integrated incredibly tightly with the provisions of services, schooling. It was a Catholic place. And no one's going to say, well, how are you Quebec without being Catholic? Because the Jewish culture is diverse. And Jews have been collectively ostracized and herded into the same, gas chambers and the same, ethnic cleansing pogroms. And so this is already the other side doesn't make a differentiation. And then there's just there is, because probably like we talked about in the beginning, that there is such a tight-knit community. It's always it's maintained itself. And so you'll find in a Jewish family people who, even if maybe even some Jews, like I can't remember who, but many Jews who would even have converted. But they're still, they're still Jewish. They're still, there's still a Jewish aspect to them. And frankly, the connections that breed joint initiatives, joint history, and joint challenges, those things still bind Jews all together.
My Catholic upbringing is still present. I do turn the other cheek, and I do have that instinct to be compassionate and have empathy. And I do have my certificate, my Baptistère, and my confirmation. So I guess that if ever there are groups that come here and take over Canada or Quebec and want to eliminate Christians, they'll just have a look at my certificate and say, "You're Catholic, here you go."
They might not. They might just say, "Oh, you're speaking French. You've got a history in Quebec. You're good enough to be on our list of problem people." I mean, then that's the way I think Jews were treated. They didn't. It didn't necessarily matter what you had on your birth certificate. No one's checking your papers necessarily. They were just going into communities and wiping them out. And so I think this kind of you're identified with this group, whether you got a paper or not. That's really, at the end of the day, where the rubber hits the road.
Because Jewish is not an ethnicity; it's a religion.
Judaism is a religion. Yeah. Judaism. Yeah. But Jews who do or do not practice Judaism exist. So I think it's interesting, the dichotomy that is often there between, the religion and the Zionism is there's already enough here to say, well, they're not the same. Especially when you look at the people who formed Israel were often themselves non-religious. So the Zionism is and this is a line of attack, I guess, that religious Jews, anti-Zionist Jews will take. It's legitimate for their perspective that, the founders of Israel were not even religious. So,
Theodor Herzl was not religious.
Exactly. Herzl, many of the early people, and, even now, I mean, Netanyahu, I don't think is a practicing Jew.
If you're murdering people, you've abandoned your God. There's no, maybe that's a Catholic perception or a way of seeing things, but honestly, if you've murdered kids, you've abandoned your God.
You might want to check this out, but the Polish Catholics, I believe, are doing a lot of the murdering back then.
You've abandoned your God.
Well, there you go. But ironically, those same people think that they're protecting their culture. They're protecting their religion by, exacting revenge on the people they deem as having done bad things to them. I mean, Jews are the ultimate scapegoat because, in theory, they killed Jesus.
That premise, I mean, honestly, as I grew up, I never saw it that way. Like, that's an outside perspective. But
how did you see it?
I love the movie Jesus of Nazareth. I used to watch it every year. It was such a good movie. The music, the cinematography. It was a long film. You start the day at like, I don't know what time in the movie was playing on TV, and it's like 3 p.m, and you go back and is that still playing on like Easter there?
Yeah, sure.
But I never saw it that way. I never saw that, let's say, the religious figure, the Jewish religious figure who decided to send Jesus to the Romans. It never clicked in my head that there was a responsibility on Jewish.
Well, that's
people. I never saw it that way.
That's heartening, but I think that kind of trope has been, at the heart of many anti-Semitic. Oh, for sure. I mean, to me, I find it ridiculous because I'm looking at it from a political point of view, and the Romans were occupying, the area, and the Romans were the ones who sentenced Jesus to death, and and they consulted people about that, I guess. But to say that the Jews were, anyway, it's all probably just mythology and kind of like, a lot of like embellishment and storytelling. That's
at this point. I've never saw it that way. Honestly, I never saw.
Well, there's a movie that actually we always watch because my partner's Italian, and then the movie that we would always watch on Easter at their at the relative's house was Jesus Christ Superstar, a more flamboyant, kind of thing.
Awesome.
But it also had these kind of ideas that it was the Jews that really was conspiring and ultimately made the decision.
Oh yeah, I've never seen that film actually. That's really weird that I've never seen it. So in the film, that's what they're promoting, or they're like pushing in that direction?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. And I'm always like, I'm just gonna sit this one out, while everyone's watching this.
Really?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it's right down to a cabal of the Jewish priests, high priests, talking what to do with this Jesus guy, this Jesus of Nazareth, who's causing all these problems, and then make the decision finally that he has to die. And so maybe that's even what's going on. This is now the trial, being like
he's being judged by the council of the Jewish leaders.
Yeah,
and he had like, you could tell that there's the doubtful person in the crowd, but there's also his friends who are like Jewish leaders. So I always saw it as like I saw these different individuals that had their different opinions about what was going on with the religious philosophies of the era. But I never saw it that way. It's so strange. Maybe I'm the one that's disconnected now.
I mean, I think it's nice that you took that perspective, but it's interesting. I will watch this because it does sound a little different than the timeline that Norman Jewison put together in his Jesus Christ Superstar.
Yeah, that's strange. That's almost propaganda. I don't know why he wrote that or put it in the script of the movie, and I haven't seen it, so maybe that's why I didn't have that perspective. But
check it out; it's interesting. The music's great.
You got to see the positive in everything. Well, there's great acting in the movie, also Jesus of Nazareth.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will check that out.
But back then, what was going on with this philosophy, this new religious philosophy? I don't know if I could say it that way. And I was thinking about that before we had the podcast. Like, I'm wondering, like, what was going on back then?
Back when?
In that era, like the Romans present, the repression of the people, the necessity for communities to come together, and the uncertainty of like this empire that takes over the region, and there was so much troubles back then as well, and the impact on the religious philosophies, and also like man, we have so much stuff to talk about. I think we should do another podcast at some point because there's so much. This is really fascinating.
I mean, I think all I can say, I'm not a scholar in early Christian, development and whatnot. But it is fascinating to know that the Romans, there's still Roman infrastructure in Britain, that they were there and it's still there. You can still touch it and see it. As a matter of fact, when I visited Bath in Britain, it's the Roman baths, and it's all the stones infrastructure is still there, and it's pretty interesting. But again, imperialism and colonialism and empire, they never go well. They never go well. They didn't go well with the Romans. They didn't go well with the czars. It didn't go well for these tin pot dictators in Europe. It's always a clamoring for power, and you're not doing anything good for people except for the people that you're directly serving, which are your friends and your family and your other kind of class allies, I guess, of the ultra rich. And so, yeah, no kidding. There's going to be these problems.
An upheaval, religious, because the impact of the Romans being in the region, I mean, this is the destruction of the temple, it's and the creation of the other Abrahamic religions. That's the impact of the Romans, I guess, because it creates stress in a society, and there's doubts, and there's thinking about what's going on, and then it just impacts on so many levels. The presence of an empire in a region and violence being committed on people has an impact, and how it impacted human society today and what's going on in all these different countries where the empire has a foothold, may it be the British Empire, the US Empire, Pol Pot coming in Cambodia, and the Khmer Rouge coming in, people being violated, and then in Africa, what's going on with M23 going on into Congo and being financed by different corporate entities or empires. It has an impact, and yeah, it's fascinating to observe humanity and trying to make sense of it all. And deep down, I think that any community has a heart and wants good onto anybody. Like, I don't know if it's...
I think there's
at the core, that's what everybody wants. Am I naive?
Kind of. Probably, I guess, a little bit, because you don't have any power. I mean, this idea that power corrupts, absolutely.
Yeah.
I guess there's something to that. Right?
Yeah.
Because for regular people who are living their lives, this is all above their heads. They don't care. But for people who are machinating, high level maneuvering, of course, money, starts to become something coveted, and I wouldn't even say it's necessarily going to only be giant empires that are propagating these problems. Anyone looking down who has power over somebody else, I mean, there's a potential for exploitation. And the further away the decisions are being made from the people who are feeling that effect, which is going to be quite vast in empire situations, the more kind of indifferent the people who make decisions are going to be to the plight of the people who are, end up going to feel the problem. So it's a constant struggle, though. It's going to be a constant struggle to make sure that the people who are on the bottom have some way to push back upwards. And the idea that then here we need some democratic tools, because if we can't speak our minds and say, this is a problem, and we can't have an honest discussion using words that have meaning, like especially when they become politicized in the case of Israel, like in our current conversation, then you're really just preventing a more nuanced and more thoughtful approach to fixing problems. It was JFK said something about, those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. And this maybe is an oversimplification, but the point is, if we can't have a democratic dialogue and we can't get at the heart of the problems in a intellectual way, in a democratic way, then we're just putting a lid on the problem and making it more explosive. And so I guess, we really need to fight for democratic tools to be applied in all situations. And the idea that people would be offended by talking about the fact that someone, there's a genocide going on, and that's not something we want to really, admit, or maybe they're trying to allude to the fact that you're just being anti-Semitic by talking about that. Just for example, the one avenue that's been used to shut down discussion, that's just going to make the problem worse because, how are we going to deal with the obvious problem that everybody can see on their cell phones or in the media or word of mouth or directly that there is a genocide going on? How can we deal with that? Well, we have to talk about it, and we need to, so yeah, I think the idea that people can just shut down conversation if they don't want it is a real problem, and that's maybe the reason why we're talking like this is really important.
And I hope that this podcast will inspire others to communicate and reach out and share the info and have an open mind and create a community, human community. Absolutely essential, or we're never going to get out of this. It's the fear to speak out, but if it's done respectfully and not necessarily pointing fingers, throughout this podcast, I consciously tried to not point fingers and paint anybody as evil or anything. I'm just here to communicate. I want to learn. I'm so glad that you were here today to speak your mind and share information with me. Any person needs to go on that quest to learn and to enlighten themselves.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. I mean, I think you're doing the right thing. And I would just say that in embarking on discussions that are politically difficult or complicated, I mean, at the end of the day, people need to be clear on the inside about what they stand for. And you've articulated that many times, that peace and collaboration between people, mutual support, and of course, just self-interest that is not going to encroach on someone else's self-interest. So that's obviously the beginning point. And I just, the only danger that I see with people jumping into the conversation is that it is so fraught with self-censorship. People should try to get over that because you can't just sit on your hands or close your mouth all the time. But at the same time, there's so many competing narratives. There's so much. The whole discussion is politicized to the degree where there's traps. I'm not saying that there's like a conscious sort of cabal trying to behind the scenes trying to steer the conversations, but it's just such a dynamic sort of terrain, intellectual terrain, political terrain, that there are millions of different interpretations that maybe make sense, that can lead down to the wrong direction. I'm quite nervous about I was watching a podcast this morning about this sort of deep dive into Zionism and how it's connected to the Christian Zionists. And it's, this is all stuff that is out there and it's legitimate. But then you kind of wonder, and in this particular case, I could see the seeds being sown towards, okay, so we've been duped. We've been duped by them. And then it becomes vengeful back. It's like, hey, Christian Zionists, you've been tricked, and it's the Jews that did it, and that's going to breed a cycle of problems again. And that's why I really do think it's important to center or at least look at the power structures, and that's why the history is important. Whose interests were there and invested in starting Israel as an entity and continuing it today. What do those things serve? And so basically, we need to always question, even our opinions that we think are, and that's where maybe from a scientific point of view, you can hold multiple hypotheses open in your mind at the same time. But not commit to any one of them. And I just, in a political situation where lives are at stake and where, there's many different factions trying to get your attention and pull you away from something that they don't want you to see necessarily, or they want you to think, you always have to rely on yourself and your own barometer. And that's not an easy task, but having an open mind is a good start.
Absolutely. Through this quest that you might face, you who are listening to this right now, it might be stressful, might not get the answers easily, and if someone is suggesting a path and it leads to someone else having a gun to the head, you're probably not on the right path.
That's a good way to put it.
And so, yeah. And so if you feel insecure and you have questions and you're feeling pain, don't give in to hate. Reach out to teachers and to people that are around you that have a good moral compass, and
Yep, totally. And give us a shout. Independent Jewish Voices. We have Jewish members, non-Jewish members, sort of supporting members, I guess we can call them. It's talk to a Jew and see what they have to say, because I think actually we're all the same when you get when the fundamentals, like you said, are all the same, and it's just the context and the perspective that we're coming from different directions, but at the end of the day we meet in the middle, and this is the way it should be.
Absolutely. I've watched some great podcasts recently as well. There was the Corey Balsam, who's in the Independent Jewish Voices on Apple Podcasts. If ever you want to have a listen, I forget the name of the podcast. I sent it to you recently for like the stuff I've been preparing in light of our podcast, and that was really interesting. Also, David Mivisar, who's he's still with the Independent Jewish IG.
So he's quite prolific in terms of his involvement in different organizations. So I think most recently he's been very interested in the Jewish Voices for Peace in the States. He might have some kind of a foot in America, I'm not sure. But in the past, I've always kind of thought of him, and he's been quite an important figure in the Independent Jewish Voices, and some people might kind of consider him like a spiritual guidance in the...
Yeah, I saw his vibe is very, he's fascinating. I've been watching some stuff of his and on YouTube, if you want to go have a listen. Thank you so much, Jesse, for being here today. It was absolutely enlightening. I'm going to have a lot of stuff to think about, and obviously there's certain things that we didn't get to talk about, but you're always welcome. This was absolutely interesting and fascinating, and people reach out there, communicate, exchange, and let's change things. Let's bring positive.
I mean, there's so much. It's overwhelming, in fact, and it's hard to. There's no end to this question, and there's no way to wrap this conversation up nicely, for sure. But I would just say that it's been great for me too, because I'm kind of just personally, I'm not a voice, for Independent Jewish Voices necessarily. I mean, we started the chapter in Quebec, and then I had a brief role at the steering committee, and I'm involved in lots of ways, but it's never giving speeches and whatnot. But to sit down and really kind of hash things out, it's not something that's normally happening for me. So I also kind of appreciated the chance to talk to you and look into some things that I was a bit fuzzy on myself, and honestly, just to sort of put a line in the sand. We have to continuously do this, but say. I'm going to state my position once again, and this is the continuous, restating of where you are. It's never finished. We're always learning, but the chance to sit down and really hash that out and come to some conclusions and ask new questions is really rewarding and enriching for me as well. Absolutely. Thank you, Jesse Greener, for being here today at the podcast. I really appreciate it. I'm just that guy with a camera and microphones, and I'm trying to send positive vibes out there, but a pretty sweet studio, actually. Thank you so much for working hard on it. It's crazy. I'm really happy we had this conversation today. Thank you so much. People out there, please share the info, learn and teach, and go out there and send positive vibes to everybody around you. Thank you. Thank you so much.